Bret Narayan had a surprisingly easy path to his first term as St. Louis alderman in 2019. His 2023 race against a former colleague was much closer. Narayan says he wanted to return to the board to wrap up unfinished business in areas like public safety. The alderman of the 4th Ward joins me next on the latest episode of Politically Speaking to talk about short-term rentals, liquor licenses, and the sheriff's office. Let's hit the music.
This is the Politically Speaking podcast, the definitive show about Missouri politics.
We've seen a county government that has had smooth and steady leadership, and I think we're on a good path right now.
I realized the office needed a prosecutor to run it.
And we have a better solution of addressing those needs.
I don't think it's about a popularity contest. What I think it about is it's time for change.
Working together across city and county, across political affiliations, that we can start to find overlapping goals.
I had some moments where I had to, lean into my courage.
You'll see us work together on areas of agreement, and you'll see us have difficult conversations when we don't agree.
And welcome to Politically Speaking. I'm your host, Rachel Lippman. Joining me in studio today is
Bret Narayan.
He is the alderman of the 4th Ward. When we first had him on in 2019, he was the alderman of the 24th Ward. In the 6.5 years that it's been since you have been on the podcast, aside from the ward, what else has changed for Bret Narayan?
Oh, a lot. I've moved houses, changed jobs. Since the now being an alderman is a full-time job, so I am no longer practicing law. There's been it's been a long time.
Yeah, it has been a long time. So like I mentioned, you were first elected in the 24th Ward, and most people thought of that as kind of centered around Dogtown, and then got re-elected in the 4th Ward after the redistricting and downsizing. So where are the 4th Ward's boundaries?
The north side is going to be the south side of Forest Park. The north boundary is. The west boundary will be city limits. The south boundary will be Chippewa, and the east boundary will be Hampton for the most part. On the northeast side of the ward, there's kind of a horn that goes out.
And your first race was a landslide, given that you were one of, I think, like 4 or 5 candidates in that race. Your second one was a little bit closer than that, and you actually came in second in the primary. Aside from the wards growing and your voting base changing a little bit, what else do you think was kind of at work?
I think it was an interesting election because you had 2 relatively popular incumbents going up against each other. It was a different feel than most elections where you have either an open seat or usually a strong incumbent.
Did it give you any pause when you saw how things were going to shake out, that you were going to be challenging an incumbent, a colleague of yours on the board? I won't say friend, but a colleague of yours on the board to, retain your seat.
It was an interesting realization, I think, for a lot of us once the maps got drawn to realize what those races were going to look like.
Did it give you a pause at all to do it? Like, what made you make the decision that I will seek re-election, even if it is running against, another incumbent, a colleague of mine, when others decided differently?
There was still, frankly, work that I felt was unfinished, and I wanted to see if I could come back and if the voters would have me back to finish up what I started.
What was some of the work that you still wanted to get done that you thought, I'd like another 4 years on the board?
I wanted to keep the work that we had been doing in getting the crime rates down, first of all, and keeping city services, trash, streets, keeping the to keep employing a vibrant workforce to actually get those missions carried out, and to also make the city a better place for small businesses, just a better place to do business in.
You talked about bringing down crime rates, and in this term, you're chairing the Public Safety Committee. With no longer having local control of the police department, what is the role of that committee now in public safety and in setting the policy for the city?
So we still oversee everything from building codes, the fire department, the jails, And I continue to have a close relationship with Chief Tracy.
And let's talk about the jail. That's something under your purview that has gotten quite a bit of attention lately. What do you think about the job that Nate Hayward is doing at stabilizing the situation with the jail?
The jail is a tricky one right now. We used to have a medium security facility as well, and while there were some problems there, there's also problems with housing people who should be housed under medium security conditions being housed in maximum security conditions.
And so what are some of those issues that happens when you put, lower level misdemeanors, nonviolent felony individuals in a setting for people who are potentially truly dangerous to themselves or others?
Well, I think the biggest complaint that we've heard from inmates is that they're in their cells for 23 hours a day, and I think that's enough to make virtually anyone unhappy.
You're not going to reopen MSI. That's been demolished. You're not going to build a new structure. What do you do?
Well, I think, this goes back to the reduction actually. When the workhouse, the Medium Security Institute, was closed, there was still plenty of discussion about the fact that we may very well need to open a second facility for people who should be held under medium security conditions. Since then, we've had a lot of turnover with there's a lot of new faces at the board, and they don't necessarily agree with that same concept that maybe we should be opening up another facility.
So given that, though, reward reduction, not going to be reversed. I don't think we're going to go back to 28. You're not going to get some of the voices who were raising concerns about closing MSI entirely or not having a different structure for more medium security needs individuals. What is the solution? What do you do with the facility that you have?
I think it comes down to programming, which we're seeing more of now under the new leadership. Just making sure that people have something to do to pass the time. I mean, jail is jail. It's not supposed to be fun, but at some point, idle hands are not a good thing.
What else got lost with the transition down from 28 to 14?
I think from a citizen perspective, one of the things that I think was lost is the kind of individual relationship that you could have with aldermen. When there's 18,000 people and only a small percentage of them are really interested in local politics, it's really easy to make sure that you're having in-depth conversations with people who have a particular interest. When you double that, you're doubling the amount of voices, you're doubling the amount of problems, you're doubling the time commitments on various boards and committees and all of that, and it became less personal for a lot of people, I think.
That kind of gets to, and I've asked this question to some of your colleagues too, kind of philosophical discussions too about the role of the alderperson. Are they supposed to be legislators? Are they supposed to handle the constituent service? Where is the balance that you arrived at, and how do you think that that's changed for you with the larger ward?
So one of the things that I ran on was legislating, not simply duplicating other city departments' work. Now, that certainly doesn't mean that if there's an issue that, say, the pothole in front of your house just isn't getting filled, and you've made the request, you've done the things that you're supposed to do on your end, and it's just not happening, then I'm always happy to step in and talk to the director of any department to say, hey, why is this not happening? But with the kind of expanded legislative role now, you can see that the board has been passing a lot of legislation and a lot of kind of bigger ticket pieces of legislation than in my first term. But that being said, you have to spend time on both.
With the new focus on that big ticket legislation, do you guys think you have enough support, enough time to get those pieces of legislation correct?
One of the great things about legislation is when you mess it up, you have a chance to fix it. It's not like practicing medicine. When you pass something, we have courts that can take a look at it, and the courts can say, hey, this passes muster or this doesn't. And sometimes you have to go back to the drawing board completely. Sometimes you just need a little tweak. Sometimes you see a piece of legislation and there's unintended consequences of that legislation that you need to circle back on and fix. But I think that we've been doing a decent job on those things.
One of the big ticket pieces of legislation that you're having to circle back on is short-term rentals restrictions, Airbnb, VRBO. You initially sponsored the legislation to get kind of a regulatory scheme in place. What was that scheme and what is its current status?
So right now, basically everything with that is on hold. There was a lawsuit brought by a short-term rental owner that thought that this legislation was in violation of the Hancock Act.
And that is basically any tax increase has to be approved by the voters. They were essentially arguing this is a tax increase on them.
Yes, they're arguing it's a tax increase. I frankly disagree with their argument, and that's what we have courts and judges for. We built these big, beautiful buildings for when we disagree with each other, and we can use them.
Your regulatory scheme was, remind listeners, the one that's tied up in court right now.
So basically, you'd have to have a business license and then a short-term rental license because you're running a business. It was basically to bring them more into parity with hotels, and there was a distinction in between people who may live in a house and rent out a room, as opposed to people who are, who own properties strictly for renting them out as short-term rentals, just in part to make sure that these were safe for people to live in. So we needed to get building inspectors out to inspect them and make sure that everything was on the up and up. And unfortunately, some folks in that industry feel like that's maybe too much. We see it in many other areas, and I mean, frankly, there's been localities that have outright banned them. I don't have a huge issue with that industry, but we do have to be able to rein in some of the more party houses that we've seen cause a lot of problems in residential neighborhoods where people did not sign up to live next to a hotel.
Has the pause on that regulatory process led to any problems in terms of those party houses?
I mean, really, it's basically the status quo right now, because before that piece of legislation went into effect, it was basically immediately stayed by the court, and that's. I don't think that action from the court says anything about the ultimate outcome here. It's pretty standard for courts to preserve the status quo while they're making their decision.
Another piece of legislation that you worked on during your first couple of years in office was making it easier for businesses to get a liquor license. And if I'm remembering this correctly, in most cases it said you don't have to go get signatures within a certain radius to put a business with a liquor license here. Did I remember that correctly?
So yes and no.
Okay.
So you used to have to go through the plat and petition process no matter what you were doing. What we were seeing is that restaurants were opening up and really, really struggling because the margins just aren't there on food. The way that restaurateurs make their money is mostly alcohol sales. And so to make it a little bit easier for our local restaurateurs, and we have so many great restaurants in the
St. Louis
city.
punches above its weight in the food scene and in arts and culture.
Absolutely.
And I will fight anybody on that statement.
Absolutely. And so to make it easier for people to open up new concepts, and we changed the process a little bit so that if you do the majority of your business in food, you can get a temporary liquor license, and at the expiration of that, if you don't have any issues, you can renew it, And then at the end of that second renewal, you can apply for a permanent liquor license. There's still public hearing, but it just kind of tilts the playing field a little bit more towards small business owners being able to operate rather than people saying, oh, I'm terrified that this is going to be a nightclub. We had square footage requirements. We had, basically a 3 strikes you're out rule. And we haven't had any problems, but we have seen plenty of small businesses open and keep their doors open as a result of this. There's still some restaurants that go through the old process. They say that, it gives them a chance to go out and talk to all the neighbors, which is essentially marketing their business, which I think is great. But the ability for the business owner to choose how they want to go through it and how much time they want to spend on that particular process while you're still trying to open up a business, I think it's been really helpful for a lot of smaller restaurateurs, especially if there's any kind of language barriers there. And, we are seeing neat stuff opening up in the city, whereas before, sadly, and not to throw any shade at Maplewood or any of the other, local municipalities, but it was very frustrating for me to see really neat restaurants opening up hundreds of yards away from
a stone's throw, almost
Yeah.
quite literally from the border, essentially there. When you were first on the show back in 2019, you had talked about wanting to do a citywide traffic study. Did you ever get that to happen?
So, yes and no.
It's a very lawyerly answer.
We were working on it, and then COVID happened, which really substantially changed traffic patterns. So I think that the data that we had maybe isn't as useful as it may have been without
so we don't
pandemic.
have the best picture because as it was being gathered was not what traffic patterns would ordinarily look like because nobody was going anywhere, essentially.
So there's that, and then, now we're seeing some people returning to work, but it's not out of the ordinary now for someone to have a job where they're in their house working 5 days a week.
The Department of Transportation was created through charter change. How do you think that could help with some of what you would want to do with the traffic study, to know what is going on and to react to the information that you have?
I think that is an interesting thing that my colleague Alderman Browning really spearheaded, and it's going to be really interesting to see in the years to come to what extent the Board of Aldermen funds that division. Without the funds, it's just kind of it's a paper tiger. But if it is funded and we can then carry out that work, it'll be really interesting to see what happens there.
How well is the board, do you think, going to do at executing their big plans like a Department of Transportation?
I think a lot of that will come down to how much institutional knowledge stays around after the next election or two. Because, if you don't have people who know the history, then you won't even know that this exists. It's funny, you get down to City Hall after you get elected and there's not a how-to book or anything. You just have to get in and start going. And so you have to rely on the knowledge of some of your colleagues on what happened, 5, 10, 15 years before you were there.
And kind of for a legislative body as a whole, what message does it send to your residents when you launch and announce these big plans and then 5, 10 years later, people are sitting there going, oh, yeah, whatever happened to XYZ ABC Department of Transportation, for example?
I think that's going to be really interesting to see because while this was a really ambitious project, it had no dollar sign associated with it. And so really it's conceptual at this point.
I do want to get into a conversation about the sheriff's office because you've got two resolutions that have kind of put yourself in the center of that debate. The first one was putting the board on record as believing that they have a role in nominating the sheriff. Why did you believe that the Board of Aldermen should have a say?
Just based on historical precedent, really. The last few times that there's been a vacancy in the sheriff's office, the Board of Aldermen has put forward the interim replacement. There was a previous legal opinion that from the city councilor that laid this out. So we were just kind of going on, this is the way that it's been done.
And so why was the resolution and putting that out as your official position on the record something that was important for you to bring forward and to, get the board to sign off on?
I think there has to be a vehicle on how we do these things. And this one, it was a resolution. I know some people thought that, this was members of the board and particularly some members of public safety and the mayor really going at it. I can tell you it really wasn't. The mayor and I talked frequently, and we were talking about this frequently, and just trying to make sure both of our main goal was to make sure that the decision would stay local rather than the governor making an appointment.
If you're in agreement that it should stay local, why then take the official stance of the board needs to have a say when it does put you in conflict with the mayor who is saying, this is my position to fill?
I think we were disagreeing on we all agreed basically on what needed to happen. We disagree on what had to happen to make that happen. And so it's, again, back to, when different parts of government disagree with each other, we go ask a judge to sort it out. That doesn't mean that I don't want to work with the mayor on literally everything.
But you have been blocked now from taking that recourse. The judge has ruled essentially that the Board of Aldermen is not a separate legal entity from the city of St. Louis, which is who has sued on paper. It's City of St. Louis versus State of Missouri. So what's the recourse when the Board of Aldermen disagrees with the official position of the mayor's office, which is that she has a say?
Well, I think, frankly, I respectfully disagree with the judge in this case.
But that doesn't do you any good as Bret Narayan disagreeing.
We've seen, other cases where the Board of Aldermen were parties and, that have gone all the way up to the Missouri Supreme Court. So I just disagree with the judge on this one. But at the same time, I'm not sure that it's worth continuing a fight over what is essentially for a 10-week temporary appointment. The main goal that I had, and I think most of my colleagues had, was just to make sure that we're getting it right. And if the judge says this is the way that it moves forward, fine.
I don't think we're fighting over whether this position does eventually get filled by a special election. That's not in dispute as to how the rest of his term will get filled out. But it does raise the question of, should the sheriff even be an elected position in the city of St. Louis, given the pretty limited scope of its duties?
I think that's a really interesting question that a lot of people are kind of revisiting. And ultimately, I think the folks over in Jefferson City are going to be debating that, I imagine.
Where do you come down on that issue as Bret Narayan?
I always hesitate to take choice away from the voters. And this is kind of a high-profile case of a guy just not settling into the position the way that I think a lot of people thought that he may. But it's also kind of drastic to say, actually, you don't get to decide on this anymore. Someone else does.
You flashed at this very, very briefly in your first appearance, and that was talking about major flooding in the city of St. Louis. The context was in a question about Mayor Cruson and how she was doing in her first term, and you mentioned she's been dealing with some pretty serious flooding. But that is a problem on kind of the very western border of your ward. You've got some very low ground there with the River de Payre cutting through there. And I know you've got some properties that are getting bought out because of frequent flooding. Tell me kind of a little bit about that process and how long it's taken to get to now this point where, these properties are just going to, I assume, be demolished.
Yeah, so it's a long process. It was the first natural disaster that I went through here that became a federal disaster area. In Ellendale, the River de Payre burst its banks, and pretty quickly there were feet of water inside people's homes. When we called the state emergency management came and looked. They called the feds. FEMA came and looked and declared it a federal emergency, which kind of opened the doors for more dollars to come in. When the Army Corps of Engineers looked at this, they said, okay, this floodplain has actually changed since the last time we mapped it well, and these 7 houses, this is going to happen, from time to time, and there is money available for buyouts. No one was forced out of their home, but people were told basically this is going to happen from time to time, and there's money on the table now if you'd like to take it. And so we had to move all the way from the Federal Emergency Management to SEMA State Emergency Management to SEMA City Emergency Management.
Because S's and C's shouldn't totally sound alike. And,
just pretty recently, I was able to get that money onto the mayor's desk to essentially reimburse for those buyouts.
So, if my understanding correctly, that the city is the paying agent to these individuals who have said, yes, we don't want to go through this every 3, 4, 5 years, and then you get the city is reimbursed by these federal funds.
Yes.
Given the current state of the Federal Emergency Management Agency, how much more difficult do you think any potential future buyouts might be, whether that's your ward or other, low-lying areas of the city that see similar flooding events?
I think, we don't have to. Unfortunately, we have a real-life example here. When the flooding in Ellendale happened, FEMA was there, boots on the ground very quickly. They were incredible. The state was incredible. And, fast forward a few years and we have a tornado that, ripped through a pretty large swath of the city. And the reaction time and the way it was handled were just two totally different outcomes. With the flooding, it was clear that not only was the cavalry coming, they are already here. With the tornado, we were waiting.
And still waiting in some ways, I think.
Absolutely.
I know that FEMA bears a lot of the responsibility, or the lack of FEMA response bears a lot of the responsibility for the tornado response. But when it comes to the city's response to it and moving money out the door that you have available, how would you grade the city's response in doing that?
As far as the tornado?
As far as the tornado, yes.
I think, we've been able to put millions and millions of dollars out the door, both for tornado recovery and for affordable housing, and the two really are closely intertwined. And so I think we've been able to be pretty nimble despite not getting the level of assistance that I feel like we deserve from the state and the federal government. And part of the reason that we were able to do that is because we were able to use the interest from the RAM settlement fund in a pretty nimble way. It just has to go through the regular legislative process as opposed to trying to go to the state or go to the feds and get additional dollars.
The board did its job. Is the city's mechanism doing its job?
I think it's really tricky, actually, to work with all of the various stakeholders to actually get the money spent. It's harder than you would think to cut checks to the right individuals. But I think that being said, I think the mayor's team has done a pretty great job given the situation that they found themselves in and the timing of it. I think there was only 7 people working in the mayor's office when
this was
tornado hit.
30, depending on how you count, 30 or 31 days after taking office, essentially. We've heard, though, complaints from residents, not just about the Rams money, but about American Rescue Plan Act dollars, that the city's mechanisms are just too slow to meet the needs. Regardless of whether you think that the city's doing it well enough, are there things you have learned from legislating this, from hearing from residents, as to what needs to change within the city's bureaucratic processes to, have checks and balances but not gum up the works?
Well, fortunately or unfortunately, our city's charter was designed to gum up the works, to make it hard to get things done. So after anything passes through the Board of Aldermen, it has to go through estimate and apportionment, which is the mayor, the comptroller, and the president of the board, and they meet monthly, and then ultimately to the mayor. Sometimes pieces of legislation are waiting on authorization from E&A before we can carry it because we don't want to get out. The Board of Aldermen doesn't want to get out ahead of where E&A is at on whether or not they're going to authorize something. A lot of it was done. It was at a time where it was 1914. The charter was designed to stop corruption and nepotism and things that were kind of rampant at that time. So they made it pretty. It's a process to get money out the door, and there aren't really exceptions to it for emergencies or anything like that. So we have to just keep on chugging forward.
Does that need to change?
I think that there's a lot of things with the charter that need to change.
Give me an example.
I think that, E&A is a big one. Charter change is hard, but I think there's issues with E&A, with parts of the city councilor's office, with just modernization of the charter, the way that it lays out the responsibilities for a lot of things. Like there's someone who's supposed to be in charge of all the lard in the city. And, it's from a bygone era, and everyone knows that, citizens are supposed to kind of upkeep these controlling documents from time to time, and we tend not to as much as we should.
So how do you get citizens engaged in remaking this document in a way that makes it better for them? Because there is the Charter Commission. It will look at it every 10 years. That kind of first iteration of it went down in flames, partially because people didn't feel like they were engaged. What needs to happen to get people in at the ground level and actually make reform work?
Well, and another thing that was kind of stymied by COVID, there was a process called the Board of Freeholders.
COVID and politics. I don't think that was all COVID.
Yeah. But, the voters can put together, they can vote to put together the Board of Freeholders. And since the city of St. Louis is actually older than the state of Missouri, when the Board of Freeholders comes together, it can do things that actually trump the state constitution. So if the people wanted to, they could vote to have the Board of Freeholders come together, and they could change anything that they wanted to.
Is that realistic, though? I mean, or is this
we
more
were,
likely?
We were right there.
I still disagree that COVID killed that. I think politics killed more than...
There was some of that.
Going back to the conversation we were having about kind of buyouts are a response to where frequent flooding occurs. And I'm guessing the question is, what else does the city need to do to prepare for or mitigate the future impacts of climate disasters? Because that's something that's only going to get worse.
I think on a hyper-local level, environmental issues are very, very hard. One of the things that I've worked on is things like air quality, lead abatement, asbestos abatement, stuff that is right in your neighborhood. But when it comes to global climate change, it's really hard at a local level. It's really something that frankly the international community needs to come together and discuss. I do know that, and people won't like this, but it's been flagged by some researchers that the amount of stop signs in the city of St. Louis are a problem, that there's increased emissions as a result of that. But I don't know if the people of the city are ready for traffic circles yet.
Maybe you can't address climate change as a whole globally, but what actions can be taken locally to get the city ready for future climate disasters?
I think one of the things that we need to be doing is being intentional about where we're building, and paying attention to those floodplain maps. And it's not a big deal if a park floods once every 50 years, but it is a big deal if your neighborhood floods. And so, looking at where we're building, particularly if there's any sort of public dollars associated with that as well.
What does the rest of your legislative agenda look like for this last year in your current term?
Well, I'm hoping to be able to put a button on the short-term rental legislation, and then going back to the drawing board on a few things. And I am frequently asked by the mayor or the president to try and carry some of the more difficult bills. So it's always interesting to see kind of what ends up on my desk that way. But I'll continue to push for legislation, the same that I've always done, just anything that I think is going to make St. Louis a better place to live, work, and play, a safer place. We basically all want the same things.
What are some of the things you want to circle back around on that you need to
redo? I would like to circle back on the hours that dispensaries can be open. I think that
just got extended, right? Am I remembering correctly that they were enabled to be open until 10 to match Illinois?
Yeah, and so what we're seeing now though is these things, love them or hate them, they're here, and there's not the crime associated with them that people thought there would be. In fact, now we're at the point where we're seeing less crime directly around them just because the amount of surveillance surrounding them. And so particularly for the medical patients, we don't say what hours your pharmacy can be open. So I think it's worth revisiting that conversation. I think there's some zoning changes. There's a lot of not terribly exciting stuff that I'd like to...
But, I mean, not terribly exciting stuff is the stuff that sometimes has the largest impact on what people are doing. It may not be what they're paying attention to, but it has the largest impact. I'm assuming the zoning goes hand in hand with the update to that, or...
Yeah, so, there's the ZOOP, I think
zoning something. I'm never going to...
Yeah. And so they're basically going through parcel by parcel and figuring out what the best use for each piece of land is. They haven't done that in many, many years. So some of the stuff that's commercial, residential, we may see just go residential or just go commercial now. And it'll be interesting to see what the breakdown is there. And there's certainly some of my colleagues that are trying to increase density in the city And I think in some neighborhoods, people are all for that. In some neighborhoods, people like a more suburban feel.
In your ward specifically, what zoning changes would you want to see to, as you said, make it a better place for people to live, work, and play?
I think increasing the number of neighborhood commercial is an interesting play, because then people can walk to places.
So this would be like the little corner, like the, corner stores under 2-3 apartments kind of thing?
Exactly. And we're seeing with new development, a lot of developers wanting to do that style of development where they say, okay, this works if I have a retail tenant. And if I have a retail tenant, then I could put 3 apartments above this, and the retail tenant is kind of almost subsidizing the building.
Do you know what you plan to do in 2027?
It's more than a year off from now.
That's not that much time in politics.
It really isn't. But I told myself with about a year left that I would start looking at what the future may hold. So stay tuned.
Politically Speaking is a production of St. Louis Public Radio, which is part of the University of Missouri-St. Louis. Fourth Ward Alderman Bret Narayan, it was a pleasure to have you on. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Until next time, so long.